virtual event. So for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Sally Blanchard O'Brien. I'm the roving archivist for the Vermont Historical Records Program. And this is the first of our virtual office hours, which are going to be held the last Tuesday of every month at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. These virtual office hours, it's a time to get together, to ask questions and learn tips and tricks and to connect with other cultural heritage workers around the state like yourselves. So today's a little bit different. This is the first of our office hours. It'll be a lot more casual in the future, but today we're doing an actual presentation, as you can see. So it's going to be a brief presentation about the results of the survey that we conducted this spring, and we will get into discussion after. But first, a little background about the Vermont Historical Records Program, or the VHRP. So the VHRP started in May 2017 with funding from the National Historical Publications and Records Commission and the Vermont Secretary of State. So it's a program at the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration, and it's part of the Vermont State Historical Records Advisory Board. The VHRP serves to improve public access to and engagement with Vermont historical records and to encourage and facilitate collaboration among Vermont historical records repositories. So we conduct on-site assessments, we provide guidance and assistance, we help connect organizations that want to collaborate on different projects or initiatives, and we teach workshops, and it's all for free. So we'll be launching some new initiatives in the near future, so stay tuned for those. In the past year, the VHRP has grown to 2 full-time employees, and with our expanded capacity, we decided that we wanted to gauge the needs of our constituents to better target our services. So to do that, we decided to send out a survey, which we conducted this spring. So our survey actually has its origins in work that was begun over 20 years ago. In 1997, the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities issued a report calling on, quote, public agencies and the private sector to support a national assessment of the nation's preservation needs and a plan to protect our cultural legacy, end quote. So then the Institute of Museum and Library Services and Heritage Preservation took that call and surveyed the condition of collections stored in America's archives, libraries, historical societies, and museums. In 2005, the Heritage Health Index report, which was called Public Trust at Risk, the Heritage Health Index report on the state of America's collections, was released. The results were startling, finding that America's cultural heritage was at risk from the lack of environmental controls, proper storage, and the lack of disaster plans. So then this led to the development of the Connecting to Collections program, which looked at collections needs at the state level. So in 2008, the Vermont Historical Society and other partners received a grant to assess Vermont's collections. Vermont's survey found that Vermont's cultural heritage was at risk to the same issues as found in the national survey, but that there was this added risk of the lack of cataloging, inventories, and other intellectual control. Several years later, the Heritage Preservation undertook a follow-up survey to assess what damages happened since the first national survey. So the follow-up survey in 2014 found some changes and that overall improvements had taken place. And the VHRP decided that we wanted to build upon these previous surveys and determine what had changed in Vermont at the state level between 2008 and now. So we had 3 goals for our survey. We wanted to identify what technical assistance Vermont historical records repositories want and need, and how to best deliver that support. We wanted to better publicize the VHRP and its services, and we wanted to get a snapshot of the state of Vermont's cultural heritage in 2021 to compare to the Vermont Connecting to Collections 2008 data and findings. We based our survey on many of the questions from that 2008 Connecting to Collections survey to allow for the comparison of data points. Some questions were left out, generally because they were too specific when we were trying to get a broader sense of conditions, or because the information within those questions was either not that important or was conveyed through other questions. Some other questions were simplified. So for example, the 2008 environmental monitoring questions asked about the specific number of areas where monitoring was happening, while our survey simply asked if it was happening at all. And we did add a few new questions to touch on current issues, such as social media usage and engaging with marginalized groups. So institutions that did respond to the 2008 survey were sent copies of those responses. We thought that getting those responses would encourage a response to our survey, but then also provides those institutions with a snapshot of their organization from over a decade ago. We had 154 responses for a 23.5 response rate, which was unfortunately lower than our target of 35%, and it was lower than the rate for the 2008 survey. We set our target at 35% because that's about what the 2008 response rate was. So, important notes, because there is a smaller sample size from the 2008 results, this may affect the accuracy of data comparisons. We also couldn't compare directly the data where questions were asked differently between the two surveys, and our survey was analyzed by us, and we are not statistical analysts. So it's important to note that these factors are there when looking at the following results. And our disclaimer is the resulting conclusions are general observations made to the best of VHRP staff ability. So with all that out of the way, let's take a look at the state of cultural heritage in Vermont right now, as self-reported by our survey respondents. So who are Vermont's cultural heritage institutions? Survey respondents were asked to indicate their institution's primary function, as well as any secondary functions. The highest percentage of primary functions is historical societies, but when you combine primary and secondary functions, the top function is archives. 2/3 of respondents manage archival materials, and academic libraries are the most likely type of institution to have archives. The next highest functions are historic sites and historical societies. Over half of respondents are responsible for historic sites or buildings, and just under half are historical societies. Other types of functions include public libraries, academic libraries, museums, nature centers, performing arts spaces, working farms, and more. 35% of respondents said they did not perform any additional functions beyond their primary function. The representation of respondents by governance type is basically the same as it was in 2008. The top 3 governance types are nonprofit, municipal, and academic. Over half of respondents are nonprofit, non-governmental entities. 1/3 are based in municipal governments, and 7% of all respondents are within academic institutions. Other types of governance include state government and corporate for-profit organizations. The 2008 survey asked about staff specifically responsible for collections care, while our survey asked about employment numbers generally for the institution, not just collections care. So in 2021, half of the current respondents have no full-time staff and 42% have no part-time staff. It's important to note some respondents included the employees for the entire parent organization, not just the unit with responsibility for collections. So for example, an academic library may have counted all the employees of the college or university, not just the library, or a town clerk's office may have counted all municipal employees, not just the town clerk's office. And we don't have a way to break those numbers out more granularly, so the data might be skewed. But with that being said, while the results between 2008 and 2021 can't be completely compared against one another because of the differences in the framing of questions and such, there does seem to be a slight general upward trend in paid staff. And this trend is also really true of volunteers. And it still holds true that volunteers are a huge source of labor for Vermont's cultural heritage institutions. 2/3 of respondents rely on volunteers for some aspect of their functioning, whether that's administration, outreach, or collections care. And this means that there might be a lack of sustainable labor for the work that needs to be done to preserve Vermont's collections. In the open-ended comment section at the end of our survey, there were several answers that talked about labor shortage, including an aging workforce, the lack of engaged younger volunteers, and the lack of resources generally. One respondent said succinctly, "The biggest barrier to progress on collections work is lack of dedicated staff time and/or funding to maintain the position." And another respondent expressed a similar concern, but with a little bit more of a positive spin, saying we are limited on active members and volunteers and feel we have accomplished great strides with what we have to work with. Another crucial resource for preserving collections is funding. We wanted to know how many institutions have received funding, such as grants or donations, from external sources in the past 3 years. There's actually been a slight decrease in respondents seeking external funding for collections. Only a quarter of respondents have sought external funding, which is a slight decrease from 2008. The number of respondents that received external funding has increased across all funding sources. So that may indicate that although there are slightly fewer respondents actually seeking funding, those that do seek it are receiving funds from a more diverse set of sources, or they may be more successful in securing that funding. The most common source of funding is from individual donors, and individual donors were also the top source nationally in the 2005 Heritage Health Survey. The biggest reason external funding isn't sought out is because respondents lack the staff time or expertise to complete the application. Over half of our respondents cited this as a reason, which is an increase from 2008. Other common reasons are that respondents aren't aware of appropriate funding sources, or that they need more project planning and preparation before requesting funds. So these top 3 reasons are the same ones as Vermont's 2008 survey and are the same reasons that are cited nationally. Planning is crucial in preserving historical collections for the future. The number of respondents that have had a survey of the general condition of their collections done has increased since 2008. Just over a third have had one done. Although the majority of respondents still haven't had a condition survey done, the trend is increasing. And Vermont is ahead of the curve because the national trend is the opposite. And over half of those respondents that have had general condition surveys done, they've had them done in the past 5 years or as an ongoing process, so they're fairly recent. Just over a quarter of 2021 respondents have a long-range preservation plan. So nearly the same percentage have a disaster plan that includes collections, and both of these numbers are significant increases from 2008. Of those respondents that do have disaster plans, 2/3 have staff trained to carry out the plan, and that's about the same as it was in 2008. Vermont is far below the national numbers with disaster plans. The 2014 national survey found that almost half of respondents had disaster plans compared to Vermont's 28% from our survey. But the good news is that Vermont's trends are actually better. So the national numbers, even though they have about 50% of people have them, the numbers have actually gone down between their 2 national surveys, but Vermont's numbers have actually increased significantly. So at the national level, staff training on emergency plans held steady at about half of the institutions having that training, while Vermont's rate is about 2/3. So then again, that's higher than the national rate. Of the respondents who do not have a disaster plan, do not have the expertise to write one, and other were tied for the most common reasons why one has not been created at 25% each. Do not have the expertise to write one has increased from 2008, and in 2008, that was the least common reason. Some of the reasons given in the other category include all of the above or multiple reasons cited from the list, leadership changes, and the promising indication that a plan was being developed. However, a few respondents indicated that they have fireproof vaults or that flooding does not occur at their location, and so a disaster plan isn't necessary, which is not true. Unexpected things happen, and disaster plans help you prepare for the unexpected. So with the decrease in expertise and the persistent misunderstanding of the need for disaster planning means that some basic education about the importance and the use of disaster planning is still very necessary here. So what are the collections that Vermont's institutions hold? The most common are books and bound volumes, with 93% of respondents reporting that they have these in their holdings, followed closely by unbound sheets, such as archives and manuscripts, and then photographs. And unsurprisingly, the biggest increase from 2008 has been with digital materials, held by just over half of the current institutions. But historical objects and buildings and sites have also increased. Where collections are stored, it is virtually the same as in 2008, with 73% of respondents storing them in a building they own. Collections are also stored in leased and donated spaces or shared with municipal buildings. A small percentage of respondents store collections outdoors, and it's presumably those institutions with live plant or animal collections or historic buildings. And a small percentage store materials in private homes. In 2008, 58% of respondents either had less than half of their holdings cataloged or did not know how much they had cataloged. In our survey, this number went up 1% to 59%. We asked our survey respondents about their desired training topics, and cataloging moved up in desirability. However, when we asked about spending priorities, cataloging and inventory fell from the first priority back in 2008 down to 6th. So this shows that the need for cataloging and intellectual control remains at the same level as 13 years ago, but there's an added concern of respondents desiring more assistance with it while being less willing or less able to pay for it. One of the biggest changes between the 2008 survey and the 2021 survey is how much digital materials are now part of collection stewardship. 58% of 2021 respondents have the responsibility for caring for digital collections, and this is a really big increase of about 30%. And also by about 30%, of a 30% increase, almost half of respondents now offer online access to some of their content. And nearly 2/3 of respondents engage on social media. 68% get online visitors through websites or online exhibits. And the desire for online training has gone up significantly by 33%. So there's not only more digital material to handle, but there's more expectation of online access from both the user side and the practitioner side. Vermont has seen a slight increase in environmental monitoring and control, which coincides with the national trend. It's important to note, I mentioned this earlier, but in 2008, the questions in the survey specified whether environmental control was happening in all areas of the building or just in some areas, whereas our survey in 2021 simply asked if the control is happening at all anywhere in the building. So it might be possible that the numbers of institutions controlling the environment in the entire building has actually decreased, but the overall trend is that environmental control has increased because there are more institutions doing it, at least in some capacity. And almost 2/3 of 2021 respondents make an effort to control temperature levels. More than half of respondents control humidity levels, which we know is a big problem in Vermont in the summer. 2/3 of respondents do control light levels. We asked a new question this year about monitoring for pests, and nearly 3/4 do. The number of respondents that have security systems to prevent theft or vandalism has basically stayed the same since 2008, and it's really evenly split. 49% do have a system, 49% do not. Our survey asked if respondents had any damage to collections from 11 different causes. The biggest cause of loss or damage to Vermont's collections, as self-reported by our survey respondents, is due to physical or chemical deterioration, followed by improper storage or enclosure. So as you can see here, the rates of damage or loss have actually gone down in Vermont across all causes, which is encouraging. However, 30% of respondents didn't actually answer this question, which may imply that they don't know if they have any damage or loss due to these causes. So we asked our survey respondents to assess their level of need for 11 different areas of collections care on a scale that reflected no need, some need, or urgent need, or don't know or not applicable responses. Vermont's needs are different than the national trends. In nearly all areas, the majority of 2021 respondents have a level of need, but not urgent need, which was also true of respondents in 2008. But the number of respondents with urgent need, even though that's not higher than just normal need, the urgent need has increased. since 2008. And not surprisingly, the largest increase in urgent need is for preservation of digital collections. And again, the national trend was the opposite. In nearly all areas nationally, there was a significant decrease in the percentages of institutions with need or urgent need in any of the areas. So we looked at the numbers for levels of need in Vermont in 5 different ways, and then we averaged those numbers into a final ranking, which you can see here. The highest averaged area of need is in emergency preparedness and disaster planning, which was also true in 2008. The next highest need is for the preservation of digital collections, which ranks much higher than it did in 2008. Conservation treatment came in third in 2021, which is much higher, or I'm sorry, it was much lower than in 2008. But staff training and cataloging remained steady between 2008 and 2021 at 4th and 5th, respectively. So let's put it all together. In 2008, the Vermont Connecting to Collections survey found results similar to the 2005 national results, that disaster planning, environmental control were very big problems. And in addition to that, the Vermont survey found that there was a lack of cataloging and intellectual control, which made Vermont's cultural heritage resources at risk. The authors of the 2008 survey report recommended that emergency preparedness needed to be the priority. But how have things changed in Vermont in the past 13 years? Like at the national level, Vermont has seen an increase in environmental monitoring and control, along with an increase in respondents with long-range preservation plans, collection surveys, and disaster plans. While Vermont's numbers are still low today, overall, the trend is going in the right direction. It has increased since we did the survey in 2008. And the top 2 biggest causes of damage to collections are from physical or chemical deterioration and from improper storage, and that's the same as in 2008. The 2008 survey found that Vermont had a lack of cataloging and intellectual control over collections, and this is what we found in our survey as well. 59% of respondents either have less than half of their holdings cataloged, or they don't know how much they have cataloged. And cataloging and finding aids has remained in the top 5 needs for both surveys. While the 2008 survey asked about staffing and volunteers specifically responsible for collections, and the 2021 survey only asked about staffing and volunteers generally, there does seem to be a slight upward trend in paid staff, which is encouraging, but volunteers are still the biggest source of labor for the state's cultural heritage institutions. Nearly 2/3 of our survey respondents rely on volunteers for some aspect of their functioning. And this means there can be challenges for finding consistent labor, as well as a lack of opportunity for those looking to be gainfully employed in collections care related work. And it likely comes as no surprise that the most drastic differences between 2008 and 2021 are in relation to digital materials. While just over half of respondents have the responsibility of caring for digital materials, it is a significant increase from 2008. Nearly half of respondents now offer online access to some of their content, almost 2/3 engage on social media, and 68% get online visitors through websites or online exhibits. There's more digital material to handle and an increased expectation of remote access. So based on these takeaways, the VHRP has decided to focus its future services and programming in the following areas. So firstly, emergency preparedness and disaster planning, because less than 1/3 of respondents have disaster plans, most commonly because they lack the expertise to write one. We want to focus on this because emergency preparedness has remained among the top 5 choices of subjects for training, is ranked as the top area of need, and because improvements have already been made in this area since 2008, and we need to keep the momentum going. We want to focus on cataloging inventories and intellectual control, because our survey shows that intellectual control remains a big risk factor for Vermont, as nearly 1/4 of respondents have no cataloged collections at all, and 59% have less than half or don't know how much is cataloged. Because our survey shows that cataloging is the top subject desired for training, but is among the last choices for spending priorities. We want to focus on proper housing and storage, because storage and enclosures are the second highest reported cause of damage to collections, and collection storage has remained in the top 3 choices for training subjects. We want to focus on digital preservation, because the largest increase in urgent need is the area of digital preservation, and it ranks as the second highest area of overall need. Combined with the large increase of digital materials cared for by respondents and the fact that technology is almost the last choice for spending priorities, this shows that Vermont's digital cultural heritage is at risk, and steps should be taken to mitigate this risk before it's too late. And lastly, we want to focus on causes of deterioration and information about conservation, because physical and chemical deterioration are the biggest reported cause of collections damage, and conservation treatment is ranked as the 3rd highest area of need. So we think some general information about conservation, including how to prioritize treatment and how to choose a conservator, could be paired with training on causes of deterioration to help institutions identify damage and get appropriate treatment. So we hope to develop resources in these areas in the coming months and are looking forward to assisting Vermont's repositories in these areas. So you've had a lot of numbers thrown at you, which can be very hard to absorb. So if you want to spend some more time with these reports, you can find them at the links here. Our report will eventually live on our website, but for now, we can just send it to you if you're interested. So just ask us. And that is all I have for you. So I think we can open it up to discussion and questions and comments. But before I do, just a reminder that this is the first of our virtual office hours, which will be held the last Tuesday of every month at 1 in the afternoon. So we did a more formal presentation for this one. In the future, they'll be a bit more relaxed and open. Pop in when you can, come with your questions, and have a chance to connect with us at the VHRP and with your colleagues around the state. Email us at sos.vhrp@vermont.gov each month that you'd like to attend.